Good afternoon, and welcome to our December 15th special meeting for the City Council, where we will be having our legislative platform workshop. I'd like to call the meeting to order and ask our clerk to please read the roll.
Vice Mayor Haddishelt.
Here.
Councilmember Albert.
Here.
Councilmember Rakucci.
Here.
Councilmember Mendoza.
Here.
And Mayor Bernasconi.
Here, thank you. I'd like to ask our Chief of Police if he would lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
The flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Sonia, would you please announce the workshop procedures?
Yes. Good afternoon. A time frame for addressing the City Council will occur after all staff presentations are concluded on the legislative platform. 5-minute limitations for speakers will apply. Today, a statewide indoor mask mandate went into effect that offers an exemption for those with hearing impairment who are present at the workshop this evening. For that reason, and if you are comfortable doing so, you may remove your mask while presenting or making public comment statements during this workshop. Thank you for your cooperation.
Thank you. We will move into public comment. Now is the time for anyone to address the council on any item not on the agenda. Do we have anyone here tonight that would like to make a public comment? Okay, we'll close public comment and just begin with our presentations.
Great. Thank you, Mayor Bernasconi, members of City Council. I'm Deputy City Manager Megan Scheid. And what you'll see tonight in tonight's legislative platform workshop is an overview of how the process works, what's happening at the state legislature and in Congress for 2022, and what issues are most important for Roseville. The platform, and if we could put up the PowerPoint, the platform guides our advocacy strategy as staff works with the council and the council's Law and Regulation Committee. It powers our advocacy work with our partners and allows us to be nimble and effective as we work in an ever-changing political environment. And it activates the engagement that strengthens our strategy as we meet with our legislators and regulators at the state and federal level. That's what the platform does. And on the next slide, gives a summary of how we implement it. And as for tonight's workshop, we're here with our government relations team, led by Mark Walensky, and with our federal and state lobbyists to provide a deeper understanding of the issues in the environment in which we're advocating for the city's best interests. I'd like to introduce our team that's here tonight, and one member of our team has a conflicting public meeting. Sean Bigley with the water utility, and Noel Maddock, and Amber Blix with the Roseville Electric, Rob Becerra with the police department, and we also have Christina Faria from Assemblyman Kiley's office with us tonight, and our state and federal lobbyists. And due to the efforts of this team, the city's efforts at in advocacy are often very successful, and Mark's going to highlight some of those tonight. For an overview of the political environment, we're joined by the city's federal lobbyist, Mike Miller with the Ferguson Group, and the city's state lobbyist, Jason Gonzalez with Gonzalez & Son. Both Mike and Jason provide invaluable support to our legislative efforts, as well as helping with identifying potential funding sources for city projects. They also provide exceptional input into the city's strategies for working within the complex and ever-changing political environment. Our government relations team interacts with Jason, Mike, and the city's other state and federal lobbyists, often on a daily basis. They're all deeply valued as members of our team and are critical to the effective implementation of our legislative strategy. I'd now like to introduce Mike Miller with the Ferguson Group.
Mayor and council members, it's my pleasure to be here tonight. Thank you for the introduction. Appreciate it. It is our pleasure to have represented the city now for 20 years. And we want you to know how much we appreciate the opportunity. It's an honor for our firm and for myself to represent the city of Roseville at the federal level. It's very interesting times, especially moving into next year. And what I'd like to do tonight is highlight three main matters that are in the news and that directly or indirectly impact the city of Roseville. Before I do, I want to just say that it's such a pleasure, in addition to working with the council and with other folks at the city of Roseville, it's such a pleasure to work with your government relations team. Professionalism is at the highest level, and it has always been and continues to be such a pleasure to work with you folks. So thank you very much. What I thought I'd talk about is very briefly the federal debt situation, which has been apparently at least temporarily resolved as of today, the bipartisan infrastructure law, and then also the Build Back Better Act. Just a brief summary of each of those items, and then happy to answer questions that you might have. The federal debt, you may have heard that there was an issue related to raising the federal debt, and but for action by Congress yesterday and early today, we would have run into a situation where we would have run into a debt situation, thereby potentially causing default on federal debt. Congress acted, and the work that Congress did yesterday and today and days leading up leads us to believe that we will not run into a similar situation until after next year's election. So that's one piece of politics that, at least for the time being, appears to be off the table, and I think that that's very helpful that it is. Moving over into the bipartisan infrastructure law, this was the infrastructure bill that worked its way through Congress in various forms over the past year. You may know it as the IAJJ or variations of that acronym, but the administration, the Biden administration, in administering this new law is settled on the bipartisan infrastructure law, or bill. So that's how I'll be referring to it and how you might be seeing it in the future. It's a very large bill, $1.2 trillion over 5 years. And we've provided the city with a special report that outlines 39 new grant programs that have been created in the bill. Also, existing programs have across the board been plussed up significantly, and I'll give you a couple of highlights there. Looking at the bill, a lot of money is going to come to the city via the state, via the MPO by way of formula. But if you look for the spot where we might be able to see some real strong opportunities to secure additional funding, that's really in the competitive grant area. As I said, the Bill Act has created a large number of brand new programs, and existing programs have in many cases doubled their funding over the next 5 years. So we're going to be working, with you, with your staff, to identify the best opportunities to go after competitive grants under this new law, and we'll be focusing. Actually, one thing I wanted to mention on that is that as we go through this, the administration has really put a premium on what's been called the 3E benefits: economic, environmental, and equity. So as we look through our projects for the city, we'll be focusing primarily on how these projects provide economic benefit, environmental and resiliency, and equity benefits as well in terms of historically underserved communities or interests. So that's something we'll be keeping an eye on. The funding is not going to all come out at once, although a very large state allocation was announced just this afternoon by the Federal Highways Administration for California, and we have more detail on that, which I can provide, to your government relations team, and they can give it to you. It's pretty detailed, but I think it gives you a good idea of where California will benefit from the Bill Act. In all likelihood, that's where we're going to see the first big tranches of funding is through the formula programs. After that, we'll see the existing, the older grant programs like infra, which is primarily related to freight transportation, RAISE, and some of the other grant programs. Those will get their tranches of money next, and then we'll start to see these new programs roll out probably in the next 6 to 9 months. There are a few programs that are really innovative, and in all likelihood, the federal agencies that are going to administer those are going to take time to put those together. So we might not see those notice of funding opportunities until maybe even as late as early 2023 for the first rounds of those. But we'll keep you informed as those opportunities become available. Couple of highlights related to the legislative platform, the Roseville Critical Concerns, active transportation. The funding for transportation alternatives was increased in the bill by over 75% over current funding levels. Fleet electrification and specifically charging and fueling infrastructure has, it's been significantly funded in this bill. Also, cybersecurity, which is a critical component of the city's legislative platform. There is funding to address cybersecurity issues in the utility area, and we'll be working with the city to identify opportunities there. Very briefly, I think I've gone on a long time, and I don't actually know how long I've talked, so I'll be very brief on Build Back Better. This is the sort of second component. The first was the infrastructure, the Bill Act, which is about roads, transportation, utilities, water infrastructure. Build Back Better is aimed at other areas, and I'm being a little bit vague on that because, frankly, this bill has evolved so much over the last 5 or 6 months that it's really hard to pin down exactly what's likely to come out. What I can tell you is that it is highly unlikely that this bill will be passed prior to the new year. And as the bill takes more time working its way through the Senate, the thinking is that it's less likely that it will pass, at least in whatever its current form is. There are some components that are likely to pass, even as standalone, but as the days pass, it becomes a little less likely that that bill will come out in its current form. Now, having said that, I probably just guaranteed that the Senate will pass it tomorrow and surprise us all. One area of interest in that bill that's been highly contentious are the state and local tax deduction conversations, and that is still unresolved at this point in time. I think at that point, I'll stop and I'll ask if there are any questions about Build Back, or if you'd like to have Jason come up, that's fine as well. But I'm happy to answer questions and appreciate the opportunity to see you here today.
Thank you very much. Does council have any questions?
Not for me.
No.
Yeah, Mike, thanks for that report, and this is an evolving landscape. I think your firm puts out sort of briefs or summaries every once in a while, and I'm sure you provide that to our staff. So I'd be very interested as the fiscal world and the priorities evolve to make sure that we get that as a council.
On the federal level, I know there's been a lot of talk regionally about trying to get Wi-Fi into our rural areas, and I know in Roseville we have some poor neighborhoods that, while it may be available, it's not financially available, and especially for the equipment side. And so I was curious, is there anything coming from the federal to help us in those areas of our city?
Yes, potentially. And we've actually been talking with your government relations staff for sort of focus probably over the last month or so. We have an expert on our staff, one of our principals, David Hoover, who is, he's got over 2 decades of experience in cable, broadband, and communications. We are looking for opportunities and ways that Build Back Better can potentially work with the city of Roseville situation. You know, you're not a rural area, and that's an easy item for the Bill Act. Given that you do have a lot of interest in communications, you've got companies that have a lot of interest in communications in the city. We'll have to see how these programs roll out, how the FCC and other relevant agencies write their guidance and write their notice of funding opportunities, so that we can see whether the city can take advantage of those programs. There is an existing program that provides low and very low income assistance for broadband service, not broadband, but internet service as well as equipment. I believe that program is getting ready to sunset. But we can provide more information. That provided, I believe, $50 a month or possibly up to $75 a month to cover the cost of internet connection, and then I believe up to $100 to secure device. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Thank you, Mike. Appreciate your update on the federal level. And now, next, I'd like to introduce Jason Gonzalez with Gonzalez & Son, who's going to provide an overview of what's happening at the state level.
Thank you, Megan, for the introduction, and good afternoon, Madam Mayor, members of the council. As Megan mentioned, my name is Jason Gonzalez, and like the Ferguson Group, we've had the privilege and honor of representing your city dating back to 2000. And if that didn't make me feel old enough, I have with me in the audience my daughter who graduated from University of Arizona last year and in January started working for the California State Legislature, the Assembly Emergency Management Committee. So the fourth generation is working in the Capitol. It obviously speaks volumes about their security or lack thereof, allowing 4 generations of Gonzalez's in the building. And who knows, someday she may be fortunate enough to appear before the mayor and council of this wonderful city. Moving on briefly to 2021, the legislative session, much as you know was dominated by COVID. It did not preclude the legislature from having introduced 2,776, all very much needed new laws and pieces of legislation, I'm sure. Ultimately, 836 were sent down to the governor for Governor Newsom's consideration. The governor signed 770 and vetoed 66. So many of those bills will be 2-year bills eligible in January, but most of which will probably be reintroduced as new vehicles to start the 2022 legislative session. As we look to the 2022 legislative session, we are hopeful that there will be some semblance of business as usual returning to the Capitol, meaning in-person testimony, advocacy, meetings with staff and legislators and the like. But business as usual will not be in the same building. The annex to the Capitol is being torn down as we speak. The governor, legislators, and all the staff are moving to what's being dubbed the swing space, about a 5-minute walk from the Capitol, much tighter quarters, a lot of cubicles, and in the event we can move past COVID, we will be working out of the swing space. As part of what we expect in the upcoming session, the good news is California is forecasted to have yet another $30+ billion budget surplus. The bad news is we expect to see a continued focus on housing. And as part of that focus, we saw 60+ bills last year. We're seeing an unfortunate trend to circumvent local control, most notably local land use authority. And we will continue to work with the mayor, the council, and your management and government affairs team to jealously guard your appropriate local land use authority. I think we all should and could agree that one-size-fits-all approach to housing development in California does not work. And as I've shared with some friends in the governor's office, there's an unfortunate narrative that local governments don't build enough housing. My response is we don't build railroads either, and local governments don't build housing. You protect your land use authority, and we look to do so as well. Moving on to sales tax, there's been a increasing kind of reverberation of whether or not local government should change the situs or the use tax, or situs and use tax. As you know, the League of Cities contemplated that at their annual conference. It went so well, they punted it to their management committee. We have also heard rumblings of sales tax offices. And I think the number one takeaway and hope as part of your platform will be to keep the sales tax. It's a locally levied Bradley Burns here in Roseville and not in Sacramento. And that will be our task at hand. Lastly, as you know, there was quite a bit of attention on the climate conference that took place in Scotland back in early November. The governor did not attend. The lieutenant governor did lead a delegation of legislators. We expect we will see quite a few pieces of legislation stemming from the discussions at that conference. Yesterday, Next 10 released a report that indicated California is not likely to meet its climate change goals, the 2030 goals, until 2063, the 2050 goals until 2111. And while those goals may be laudable, our focus and interest will be to ensure those goals, that many of which the regulations and whatnot will have real life impacts on the city's ability, particularly your utilities, to provide much needed services to your constituents and the residents and contain cost. Because oftentimes, as we say, it takes green to be green, and there are costs involved. And lastly, I would also like to once again thank the mayor, the council, the management team, your government affairs team for the personal and professional relationship we enjoy. You folks, this platform, this workshop, it is unique. We represent 50-plus cities throughout the state. You're a leader amongst public policy discussions in Sacramento. Sometimes it may not always feel that way, but you are. You've been recognized with the statewide associations for your work in the utilities teams, and it truly enables us to be successful. So happy holidays, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jason. Does the council have any questions?
I have one, Jason. I just wanted to, maybe you can just tell us, what is it like in one day in your life going to in the state capitol? I mean, do you have what's your contact of what we used to know as normal? I mean, besides, like Zooming, and I thank you for you being here, and we can see people from our federal and state. But, when we even talk of going to meet our legislators at both state and federal level, we probably could meet them just as well on Zoom. But I just, do you have some contact with people?
We have regular contact. I will say COVID changed all of our lives in probably every profession. Okay. I was fortunate enough to have 20-plus years in the business to try to adapt to COVID. Cell phones, text messages, emails, all of which we never rely upon. Our job is in person, much like meeting with yourselves and as you would like to meet with your legislators. And we oftentimes say there's nothing that replaces that personal interaction. Well, we adapted, but hopefully in 2022, to answer your question, we will be back to in-person meetings. No day is the same, depending on the hearings, the issue. You never know some of the strategies that are employed. Just as an example, the most contentious housing bill was coincidentally brought up on the day of the deadline to hear fiscal bills in the fiscal committee. So you voted on the assembly floor, and the fate of your assembly bills were being contemplated after adjournment of the assembly. I'm sure a total coincidence, but it's never the same in Sacramento, one day to the next.
Thank you. Thank you.
Do you have any questions? So, Jason, thank you for your courage, your bravery, your decades of service. And I'm sure amongst your clients, this is an often requested priority. Unfunded mandates coming on down to our shoulders. Our taxpayers are paying already. Their dollars go into the state coffers, and yet we, especially in our environmental utilities, often have the imposition of programs that are not one size fits all. So that was the prelude to the question. I think this is the second year with a $31 billion. The Legislative Analyst's Office predicted that $31 billion. Barring somebody pulling the emergency brake on the consumer economy, it's probably going to be more than $31 million. What are the prospects of some of the general fund dollars being allocated and relieving that unfunded mandate burden on our taxpayers and ratepayers?
I smile as I'm hearkening back to 2004 when local governments and the legislature all worked together on Proposition 1A. And there was a provision that had for a timeline to repay unfunded mandates. That timeline was not met. I would put unfunded mandates, while a priority, I'd put it with the GAN limit. There is no shortage of creativity within the Department of Finance, and they find ways to prioritize other issues. The state Senate has released their budget priorities, and an equitable economy is one focus of the $31 billion in spending. But I would say it's something we can and should put on the table. Counties are particularly, they're bearing a lot of the brunt with hospitals, jails, and the like. But it's a piece of the puzzle, and if they don't repay it during a surplus, when do we ever get it repaid? So
yeah, and it's a Machiavellian structure down there, isn't it? Even though I think you have an increasing number of legislators who've either sat in these chairs or county chairs or others and understand it. So thank you for your bravery, your courage, and your persistence.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jason. Jason mentioned the assault on sales tax, and that's initially what brought us together 21 years ago. So the defense of that continues, and we just really enjoy the decades-long relationship with both of your firms and appreciate all the work you do to support us. Mark and I were saying before this that this is the 11th year that we've been going into our 12th year, doing the legislative platform workshops, and we really appreciate the support of the council. And to demonstrate kind of some of the outcomes from that effort, Mark, I'm going to turn it over to Mark to review some of the wins from this past year.
Thank you, Megan. Good afternoon, Mayor Bernasconi and Council. The following provides a brief overview of the diversity of the types of issues that are important to city departments and highlights some of the achievements of the government relations advocacy efforts. I'd also like to note that these efforts were fully and effectively supported by the state and federal lobbyist teams. As a result of the shelter-in-place moratorium on shutoffs and loss of jobs due to the pandemic, customer utility debt and rental debt skyrocketed. The government relations team worked with our statewide trade associations to secure state and federal funding to help our water, wastewater, and electric customers most impacted by the pandemic to erase their past due utility charges. Senate Bill 619. The bill benefits local jurisdictions like Roseville who are making reasonable efforts to achieve the organic waste recycling targets established through the implementation of Senate Bill 1383, the state's short-lived climate pollution strategy. The bill will limit Cal Recycle's ability to impose penalties until January 2023. The governor did sign this bill into law. With respect to Senate Bill 556, we worked with our trade associations to advocate against more onerous requirements for local governments in the review of small cell attachments on city infrastructure. The governor ultimately vetoed this bill. With respect to public safety, SB 2, the police department opposed this bill, but through advocacy efforts and working with trade organizations, significant adjustments were made that softened the impacts of the legislation. These efforts resulted in accomplishing the spirit of the legislation while ensuring the impacts to our local law enforcement agencies were mitigated. AB 89, this bill evolved from its original form through the advocacy process and working with trade organizations. Significant adjustments were made that softened the impact of the legislation. These efforts resulted in accomplishing the spirit of the legislation while ensuring the impact to our local law enforcement agencies were mitigated. And finally, AB 122. The city had taken an opposed or less amended position on the bill since it would have allowed bicycles to treat stop signs as yield signs when there are no vehicles present. Staff didn't have concerns with this approach on residential streets or collector streets, but did have concerns on this approach when entering a stop from a residential collector onto an arterial. The bill was vetoed by the governor. Moving to proposed modifications and critical concerns. The first change I'd like to highlight is in the citywide legislative principles section on page 7, which is to add and support legislation that protects and maintains city sales tax revenue to item number 4. This identifies a concern that legislation might be introduced that would negatively impact the city's sales tax revenue. The next item is in the Administrative Services Platform, item number 12 on page 9. This will advance the statement to support legislation that restores the federal tax exemption for advanced refunding bonds as a critical cost-saving tool for local governments. Tax-exempt financing is the cornerstone of public infrastructure programs and an important resource for financing beneficial projects such as the construction of roads, bridges, electric, and water infrastructure projects. A tax-exempt refunding bond can be used to refinance existing debt at more favorable terms, including lower interest rates. In the critical concerns section, federal funding for transit on page 24, this statement addresses a deep concern regarding the U.S. Department of Labor determination regarding California's Public Employees Pension Reform Act of 2013, or PEPRA, that contends it restricts agencies from bargaining in good faith with transit employees. The approval of Federal Transit Administration, or FTA, grants requires approval from the Department of Labor. As a result, FTA plans to withhold grant funds from Roseville Transit and other California transit agencies. This could impact over $3.6 million in FTA COVID-19 relief funding program for Roseville Transit in fiscal year 22 and 23. The city will support efforts to overturn the U.S. Department of Labor's determination. And then finally, federal funding for active transportation and streets on page 24. The Federal Highway Administration and Caltrans recently requested changes to the Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality, or CMAQ, and Regional Surface Transportation Block Grant Program funding processes. Per regional funding agreements, CMAQ and the Regional Surface Transportation Block Grant Program are passed through to Placer County Transportation Agency and distributed to local agencies by formula. CMAQ funds average $1.3 million, and the Regional Surface Transportation Block Grant Program averages $1.5 million annually and is one of the most flexible transportation funding programs. Roseville has used these funds for arterial road resurfacing. The city won't support the proposal because we would lose local control and be required to participate in the Sacramento Area Council of Governments competitive funding program. At this time, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Noel Maddock, Utility Government Relations Administrator, to provide an overview of some of the proposed changes for the Environmental Utilities Department. Noel?
Thank you, Mark. I can get in here. Good afternoon, Mayor, Council members. Noel Maddock with the Environmental Utilities Department. I am going to start off, and the first change that you'll note is on page 6. And what we have proposed to make the change here is, since we've already executed the WIFIA completed the WIFIA application and its approval, we are now turning our focus to seeking funding from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, as well as once the Build Back Better Act is passed, we will be seeking funding from there as well. The next item that we're proposing to make a change is actually in the full layout of how we have presented the information to you in our platform. Before, our platform was divided by division. Now we are presenting that platform by subject areas. EU believes this provides a more unified and succinct approach to capturing the many cross-cutting issues that we're working on. At the next section is in the water supply and delivery. And there are 3 updates on this in this section. And what those 3 updates are addressing is the legislative and regulatory attempts to undercut local decision-making for our future growth as well as our water resources. The next change is in the biosolids, recycled water, and energy, which is on page 18. And what EU updated this section so that we can advocate on issues of liability for new and emerging constituents of concern like PFAS, so that the liability remains with the manufacturers of products rather than falling on the local wastewater entities. And I will note that this update is consistent with the intent of Roseville's extended producers responsibility resolution. The next update is also on page 18, and this is for our worker safety and training. We actually expanded this section to address employee safety, the recruitment, and training needs across all of EU. With what has been referred to as the graying workforce, it has never been more important to be able to attract new people into the utility fields and to provide them with safe workplaces and opportunities to learn and grow as technologies change, especially what we're seeing with the electrification of our fleets. The last item is under the critical concerns, and this is dealing with the implementation of what was passed and is referred to as the implementing the conservation as a California way of life. The various agencies and regulatory bodies are in the process of developing the rules that will dictate what each local agency's water budget is. And before the state has even been able to implement it, and the local water agencies are applying it and trying to meet those mandates, a legislator has introduced a bill last year, AB 1434, and that measure would ratchet down what one of those elements that will be our budget will be based on. And so really what this new section provides is the ability for Roseville to combat that type of activity in the state legislature as well as in the regulatory when they're trying to make changes before we've even had a chance to implement what was already passed.
That's on page 20, by the way.
Oh, thank you. And with that, that concludes the EU's overview of our modifications. And I would like to invite Amber Blickstep to go over the electric platform adjustments.
Thank you, Noelle. Good afternoon, Mayor Bernasconi and council members. Amber Blixt with the Electric Department. Diving right into our utility platform on page 15, we made amendments to include the word reliable to specify the importance of maintaining reliability while meeting the state's environmental and energy goals. In terms of the critical concerns for the upcoming legislative and congressional session, beginning on page 22, we remove language on suspension of disconnections for non-payment. This was really a concern unique to last year due to the pandemic, so we are taking this out of the critical concerns for this year. Next, we added language regarding the affordability of electric rates to stress that we will continue to advocate for local control when approaching any new or proposed policies that may result in rate increases for our customers. We also added language on funding and grant opportunities. We saw this year with the CAP program that there were opportunities for us to engage through legislative efforts to access one-time funding. And we will be looking out for additional opportunities like that in 2022, especially as the state is expecting another budget surplus situation. We will also be looking for opportunity that could be used for new technology or infrastructure upgrades associated with electric vehicle deployment. And then finally, we added language expressing concern that the existing clean energy targets in the electric sector could accelerate or be altered in some way during 2022. And adjustments to the existing targets mid-course could be challenging for us to implement and costly, and may also complicate our existing planning processes. So this is an issue that we will continue to pay close attention to going forward. And with that, that's a general overview of the changes that we've included for this year's electric platform. And with that, I'll pass it back to Mark.
Thank you, Amber. And so in conclusion, as the new year unfolds, the government relations team will remain focused in implementing the legislative advocacy strategy and will continue to communicate the city's advocacy position with the city's state and federal elected representatives and with our regional, state, and national coalition partners to ensure the priorities defined in the platform are supported effectively. Council's input provided tonight will be incorporated into the final legislative platform, which staff will bring to Council for their consideration and approval at a City Council meeting in January. We'd like to thank our state and federal lobbyists for their insights and participation, the department heads and staff for their outstanding support, our state representatives and their staff, and our community partners for their continued input and support of the city's legislative advocacy effort. And then finally, I'd like to thank the government relations team, who are exceptional at what they do and an outstanding group of people to work with. This concludes our presentation, and we're happy to take your input and answer any questions you may have.
Excellent. Thank you all so much. I will start with the council. Does the council start with, to my right, are there any questions or comments over here for staff?
I'll make one. I think you echoed it in some of the things you said, is one of the things you'd be looking at, not only in the future, but you have been, is that we get mandates and then they have a deadline to meet, and then that goalpost gets moved again and then moved again because you get closer, and it says, no, that's not good enough, let's do it another, more faster. And that it's nice to have really good goals, but you have to have realistic goals, and for all cities, not just Roseville, just for all of us, so that we can play by the same rules. So thank you for being a watchdog for that.
Mark, you said everything I was going to say, and I want to thank our state and federal. Those are great updates and presentations. So thank you from both your groups. We appreciate that.
Vice Mayor Hadashot, any comments?
Yeah, thank you. We've got 25 pages of guidance here, and we're focused on the changes. If we looked at page 16 under the environmental utilities platform, new language is added, delivering critical public health services. I understand that in the world of water, it's health and safety. In the world right now that we're living in, public health services feels like it has a different meaning. I'm wondering if you would be comfortable changing that to environmental health services, because that's really what we're talking about, ensuring that the environmental utilities that we have, that they are delivered in a healthy way, so that it doesn't create any problems for our businesses or services. So just, in case you publish something, right, somebody said public health, I thought that was the county's job, right? So just a suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Alvern?
The Vice Mayor's suggestion, I don't know if we should discuss that or what we do with that exactly. When we go back to my question, it was on page 18, and this was just more, it wasn't an issue with what was written. I just don't understand something. I feel like I should, but I don't. I was wondering if somebody could just briefly explain it. And it's in the biosolid, it's what we added there. It's a support exemption of biosolids from the Superfund liability. Could we just, somebody explain what the Superfund liability is? Again, I apologize. I feel like I should know that, but I don't.
Yeah, Superfund is something that the federal government will identify as being a Superfund, which means it needs to be remediated. And so what they've attempted to do, or what they've been addressing, are liability issues and how to address those constituents of emerging concern that are ending up in those biosolids and then potentially land applied. And wastewater agencies don't create what is within the product that results from the wastewater treatment process. And so it's just making sure that the liability remains with the producers of the actual chemical.
Okay. So it's like a massive gotcha program out there that we just don't want to have our biosolids have to pay into that with penalties.
We do not want to have to take on the liability for the cleanup of those biosolids or the chemicals that may be potentially in there.
Thank you.
Sure.
Anything else? Just want to express my appreciation to all of you and to the team. There's something to be said about continuity of a government relations team with staff and then our extended team, which, by the way, Jason, you might want to consider changing your name one of these days, right? With maybe your daughter coming on board. The sons might not fit, yeah. So anyway, it's just invaluable, and you understand our desired outcomes and our goals that I'm sure all cities stress local control, and that not a nanny government that believes that they can pretend to understand our city better than we do. So I just appreciate you for getting our issues and advocating on our behalf. So I think that probably finishes us off on the content on our agenda. I need one last public comment. So is there anyone here tonight that would like to address the council on any item that's not on the agenda? Thank you all very much for your time. We have a council meeting at 6 o'clock if you all want to stick around, but we appreciate you being here, and Merry Christmas.